Well, I came to Hollywood and arrived here in August 1923 with $40 in my pocket and a coat and a pair of trousers that didn't match. And one half of my suitcase had my shirts and underwear and things. The other half had my drawing materials. It was
we
a
don't
cardboard suitcase at that.
we don't think of you in terms of the silent picture era. What did you do when you finally got out here?
Well, I tried to get a job doing anything I could in the studio so I could learn. I was a little discouraged with the cartoon at that time. I felt at that time that I was getting into it too late. In other words, I thought the cartoon business was established in such a way that there's no chance to break into it. So I tried to get a job in Hollywood, working in the picture business so I could learn it. I would have liked to have been a director or any part of that. And there was nothing open, so before I knew it, I had my drawing board out and I started back at the cartoon. And I was able to secure a contract for 12 of these short films. And I did all the drawing myself. I had no help at all. I was all alone, but I made the first 6 practically alone. Then at that time, I was able to get some of the boys that had been with me in Kansas City to come out. So from the 7th on, I had some help, and I got by the first year, and they were fairly successful, and that led to other things. And with some of the boys I'd worked with in Kansas City, augmenting the setup, I was able to eventually build an organization, and it reached a point that I had so many working with me, and so much time and attention demanded that I had to drop the drawing end of it myself. But I've never regretted it because drawing was always a means to an end with me. And so through these other boys who were good draftsmen and artists in many different phases of the business, very talented people, coordinating their talents is what has built this business. And if I hadn't dropped the drawing end of it myself, I don't think I'd have built this organization.
When did you establish your own company? What year would that have been?
1923. My brother was here, and in effect, the government helped subsidize us, and I'll explain that to you. My brother was a veteran of the First World War, and he had been hospitalized and things, and so he was receiving a certain disability compensation. It amounted to about $85 a month, and we lived on that while we established the studio. And from that time on, my brother Roy and I have been together in this business. And until the year 1940, we didn't have a stockholder.
When was Mickey Mouse born?
Mickey Mouse came about in 1928.
With sound, I presume. Hmm?
Well, no, the first Mickey Mouse was made silent, and while we were making the first Mickey Mouse, sound came. So we decided that there's no sense in making anything more silent, and we immediately switched to sound, and we didn't have any sound equipment or anything else, but we went ahead and made them for sound, and we eventually got sound on them, and of course, it, I think, played the big part in establishing Mickey Mouse.
Where did the idea for Mickey come from?
Well, it came about through a situation that I was contracting with a middleman for my films, and they were being released through Universal. And he was a rather unscrupulous character, and he thought he could cut in and move in a little better, and I pulled away from him, and I was left alone. And he happened to own the character; he had a right to the character. So that was one of the big lessons I learned. And from then on, I said, "There's no middleman." He contributed nothing; we did everything. So I had to get a new character. And I'd been doing a rabbit. It was called Oswald the Rabbit. I did and started for him. So I had to have a new character. And I was coming back after this meeting in New York, and Mrs. Disney's with me, and it was on the train in those days, you know, and there's over 3 days from New York. And I said, we got to get a new character, and I'd always, I'd fool around a lot with little mice, and they were always cute characters, and they hadn't been overdone in the picture field. They'd been used but never featured. So I decided it would be with a mouse, because at that time I didn't have Mickey as more or less a normal scale human being. I had him as a scaled mouse with overscaled props. And yeah, that's how it came about. It's kind of like, and then the name came, what would you call him, and the euphony there of Mickey Mouse. And I had a Mortimer first, and my wife shook her head, and then I tried Mickey, and she nodded the other way, and that was it.
Is it true that you did the voice for Mickey yourself in the early days?
Oh, yeah, I still do it.
I was going to ask if you could, and you still can.
Well, it's just the falsetto, and we were fooling around and trying to get a voice for a mouse, and nobody knew what a mouse would sound like, so I said, well, it's kind of like this. And the guy said, well, why don't you do it? And I knew I'd always be on the payroll, so I did it.
When was Donald Duck born?
Well, Donald came about 4 or 5 years after Mickey Mouse, and I heard the voice on the radio. It was almost an amateur program, and this boy was imitating animals and things and birds, and he had this little gag that he ended his act with about the little duck. He had a girl duck, reciting Mary Had a Little Lamb, and it was that odd voice, and I immediately got in touch with the radio station. They didn't even know who he was. He'd gone. I've traced him down and found he was working for a dairy, and he was doing little lectures in the schools on bird life, wearing the uniform of this dairy, advertising the milk. It was an indirect way of getting their advertising. And he'd move to his classrooms and tell them about the birds and how the meadowlark could sound and all of that. So it was he wasn't making much money, and I said, well, I can pay you a little more than they're paying if you want to come over here, and we'll find out what we can do with that voice. So he was here on the payroll for about a year before the thing that kept throwing me all the time was a girl duck. And finally, I said, well, it don't have to be a girl. It can be a boy duck, you know? Mm. So we ended up with Donald.
What about all the other characters like Pluto? And did you think of these yourself, or is it sort of a joint?
Well, they evolved. Now, Pluto, we were doing a short with Mickey Mouse. I think it's called The Chain Gang, where he escaped from prison, and they sent the hounds after him. And one of these hounds, we were fooling around with this hound that was on the trail of this runaway mouse. And out of that came this funny hound character. And from there on, we said, well, we can use him. And before we knew it, we had him in as Mickey's pal, and we had changed him a little bit from the hound, but that's how it started. All of them will spring out of something. Now, the Donald Duck came from this voice. Then we tried to find a character. Then I had a little subject coming where I used a duck, and it was Donald, and from there on, he blossomed out.
And the family grew.
Yeah.
Where are they all now?
Oh, they're very active right now. We do an awful lot with them in television, and we do a certain number of short features to accompany our longer features.
Mickey is still working on.
Oh, yes.
We're very happy to know that.
He's 30 years old now.
That's a pretty old mouse, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think through the years, he's a better constructed mouse than he ever was. I think
he's improved with age.
He's improved with age, yeah.